So, welcome to today's webinar titled Access Image Pro from Home, a webinar on segmentation, classification, and measurement. My name is Nick Beavers, President of Media Cybernetics, and I'm glad you're able to join us today. Today is the second in a series of webinars that we're using, and we're very excited to talk about our new extended trial of Image Pro. And on our next slide here, I want to just present and let you know that we're offering a new free community version that is extended, offering our image analysis platform through May 31st, 2020. Obviously, with all the technical and economic hardships that we're facing right now in the world, we felt it was very important for us to help in every possible way. Our community of users are always using Image Pro day in and day out in their facilities. However, during this time, while a lot of people are having to work remotely, we want to make sure that the software was still available. So we're providing our flagship analysis platform, Image Pro 10. It offers a myriad of resources available to you and anybody who's using Image Pro through this timeline. As you can see here on the screen, Image Pro is the latest version in a long line of the Image Pro family. So if you are using a previous version, Image Pro Plus version 7, Image Pro Insight 9, Premiere 3D, or Premiere version 9, you actually have an upgrade path to the latest version of Image Pro. And all of these products are able to be moved as a replacement and have a major upgrade to the latest platform. So there's a very similar set of features, and what you'll see is that this latest version provides a complete replacement for any of these products if these are the types of versions that you are using. Now, in Image Pro version 10, we do have new options available that are either replacements of some of the technology that we're using on the older versions of the platform, or brand new options as well. So what you'll see in version 10 is that when you get the extended free trial, you'll have access to all of these modules. The 2D image capture module, the hardware automation module that was developed in partnership with Objective Imaging. We offer a 3D, 4D visualization and analysis capability as well as a module, and then we can expand that with the big data visualization add-on. Of course, all of the Image Pro copies that are licensed can be available as single-user licenses or in a network server option as well. Now, the network server license on Image Pro 10 can be really valuable in times like this. If there was a network server installed and you were able to use, say, VPN to get onto the company network, you'd be able to access Image Pro 10 network server license from home or anywhere in the world. Now, Image Pro really is for everyone, and so we wanted to just point out that today's webinar, we're trying to make sure that we address the functionality of Image Pro and all of the tools of Image Pro, regardless of where you come from and what kind of work you're doing. So Image Pro really is for everyone, from life sciences, manufacturing, and material science, to even natural resources, security, and pathology. And a lot of our customers come from all different walks and all different industries. And so while the platform itself is very capable, we do see a lot of customers using defined workflows in life science for cellular analysis. We also see customers who are doing a manufacturing process where they actually need a step-by-step rigorous QA test, and that can be done in Image Pro as well. So the flexibility of Image Pro allows for a variety of tool sets and a variety of analysis options, very intelligent machine learning and classification tools, and they can be applied in a variety of different ways in a variety of different industries. And so we have a lot of different people on the call today, and so we wanted to make sure that we talk about the tools in general and then help you to apply them specifically to your application. Now, during the webinar and even after, if you need additional help, be aware that today's webinar will be recorded, and all the attendees of this webinar will receive a recording by email. Later, you'll be able to access that same webinar recording from our website at mediasci.com/remote access, and you can gain access to that from the main page. We've placed a static banner on top of the home page to help you get access to that quickly. Now, if you sign up for our next webinar, that's going to be next week, Tuesday, April 28th, and we're going to be expanding upon the third in our series where we dive into advanced analysis. And so we're trying to really take each webinar and build upon it to help expand upon the education of how to use this new Image Pro 10 extended trial. And each one will be recorded. We recommend watching them in order. Now, also, in addition to that, there's a really great place to get started, and that is the Getting Started page. So if you just go to mediasci.com/support/imagepro/get-started, you'll see there that there's instructional material. There's a quick start guide, a download and install forum, and also a series of videos that will help to guide you through various different aspects of the software. And if, depending upon what your application is, the different videos are applicable to your needs. And then secondly, I also want to point out that there's a variety of different options to contact our support team. So we offer 3 different options. First of all, there's the community. That's a vibrant, useful community that really helps to give great answers for any of your challenges that you're facing. If you want to just post a technical question about how to use the software, or even a challenging application question of how you might do something more custom, you can do that on the forum, and you can expect an answer from the community. Next, you can submit a support ticket, which will generate a ticket, and you'll be able to ask our inside staff to help supply an answer to any kind of question you may have. And lastly, you can call in if you need to. So if you go to mediasci.com/support/contact, we're showing here America's EMEA contact information, but of course, we have partners in Asia as well that would be able to assist with any of these questions you may have. We put their contact information on the web as well. So without further ado, we want to get into today's webinar, and I'm going to pass control over to our presenter for the day, Dr. Andrew Barlow. And Dr. Andrew Barlow will be going through today the segmentation, classification, and measurement in Image Pro 10. And looking forward to what he has for us today. So Andrew, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Nick. Hope everybody can hear me clearly. And
great.
That's excellent. Let me just, excuse me for one moment. I'll just get to the appropriate slide. Okay, so thanks for joining us, everyone. This afternoon I'm going to go through a quick introduction to Image Pro, followed by discussing segmentation and measurement of objects using count size. Then we're going to look at using the data collector, and we're going to finish off with classification of objects. So when you first open Image Pro, this is what you're going to see. And Image Pro displays a welcome page by default. And this has some useful things in it, such as links to any recently opened images. It also contains a tab that contains training resources, which are training videos, which are very useful, very helpful. You can also have a tab to look at our news feed and also access our customer forums, where you can find many of your questions answered. If you want to hide the welcome page, you can just click on the cross and it'll be hidden. And if you wish to reshow it, you can go to the help menu and just choose the Welcome to Image Pro option, and the help page will be displayed. So when you come to open your images, you go to the File menu and select Open. And you'll see several options here. Don't be intimidated by this, it's very simple. Generally, you're going to use the Open Images option, and this will allow you to open images individually, and it'll deal with images that are multi-set data set. So if, for example, you have a XYZ file, it will open that, and it will open it as a multi-channel, multi-Z plane image, if that's what's in your data set. You can also open images as a sequence. So if you have multiple frames and you want to open them as a single sequence, you can do that using the second option. And also you can open a set from individual files as well. So if you want to build a multi-channel or multi-positional data set, you can do that using the third option. And the final option is to open multiple images from multiple folders. Now, as I mentioned, don't be intimidated. Almost always the first option, the simplest option, open images, is going to be the right option for you. In Image Pro, tools are organized into ribbons, which are based around common functionality. Let's look at a few of these ribbons. So the Adjust ribbon has tools to adjust contrast, bit depth, apply color lookup tables. You can also create color images from monochrome images here, and you can split out color channels from this ribbon. The process ribbon contains the extended depth of field tool, so if you have volumes and you want to shrink them, collapse them down into a single plane, you can do that using the extended depth of field tool using various different methods. There's also a tiling tool, so if you have scanned images, you can stitch them into a single large image using the tiling tool. We have the image math tool, so if you want to add, subtract images from each other, or multiply them by fixed values or add fixed values, you can do that using the image math tool, which you see here as calc. And we also have classic image processing tools, so you can apply 2D and 3D filters, such as kernel filters, to both 2D and 3D datasets. In the select ribbon, you can add regions of interest to your tool, so you can add regions of interest of various shapes from here. You can add annotations, and here's where you also find the Features Manager. The Features Manager is very useful for saving regions of interest, annotations, or measurements from one image and applying them to other images. Next we come to the Count Size tab. This is where we find our segmentation tools, and that's what the majority of this webinar is going to be focused on, so we'll be coming back to this shortly. The Measure tool contains many tools for making manual measurements on your images. You can, for example, add points and manually count objects by adding points, and you can inspect the grey levels beneath those points. You can add and measure circles, rectangles, lines, and angles to your images. And you can also make relational measurements. For example, if you add 2 lines, you can measure the incremental distances between those lines. So it's a very useful tab for industrial inspection and things of that nature. In the 3D Measure tab, you're going to find segmentation and measurement tools for 3D objects in volumes. Now let's take a look at the General Image Pro interface. So at the bottom, you're going to find the Image Set Navigation tool. So if your image has multiple dimensions, such as multiple channels, in this case we have multiple sites, so it has multiple XY sites, you can navigate through those dimensions using this tool. At the bottom of the user interface, you find the status bar, and this contains many useful things such as the date and time that the image was captured. It contains the XY location and intensity of the pixel beneath the cursor, so if you move your cursor around your image, you can actually inspect the grey level beneath it. You will see it's mono 95 when the screenshot was captured. You'll find calibration information, so here I can see this image is calibrated and that the units are micrometers. And you can also find zoom control, so there's a zoom slider and a fixed zoom control that allows you to control the level of zoom of the image in the workspace. This is the application workspace where you can see your images. And by default, Image Pro contains an image strip, which contains a useful array of thumbnails that lets you navigate through your images that are currently open in the software. And on the right-hand side, we have the Details panel. So in this case, I've selected the 2D Filters tool, and here we can see the details of how I can apply various different 2D filters to my image. If you require help, there's a help menu on the right, and if you click on the Image Pro help, you get a searchable help file open. And here you can see I've searched on the word count, and I found the count size help, which I'm currently displaying in the help. Tools are arranged into groups by function, and each group has a context-related help button, which you can display and select in the bottom right-hand corner of each group of tools. So if you look at the segmentation tools from the count size menu, if I were to mouse over the bottom right-hand corner, I see this question mark, and when I click on it, it automatically opens the context-related help for count size. Okay, let's move on to the first skill I'd like to go through, which is object segmentation and measurement. So object segmentation means separating your objects of interest from the background. Image Pro has the options to do this in the Count Size tab, and there are 4 of them. The first one is called Auto Bright, which allows you to find bright objects against a dark background. We also have Auto Dark, which allows you to select dark objects against a bright background. We have Manual Segmentation, which you can use to find bright or dark objects using your own thresholds. And we have Smart Segmentation, which allows you to find groups of objects based on multiple criteria using a machine learning algorithm. Now, it's always good to start with a blank canvas when we're doing segmentation. We don't want to carry anything over from previous measurements we've made. So I always start my analysis by clicking on the reset buttons in the count size ribbon. And then I select my types. So if you click on the types button, we see all possible measurements in a table, and they're organized into categories, and they're displayed, all of the possible measurements are displayed on the left, and on the right hand side we see the selected measurements on the right. In this case I've selected area, mean intensity, perimeter and roundness, and I chose these from the region category of measurements. Now when Auto Bright is selected, Image Pro automatically sets a threshold that separates bright objects from the background. And if we take a look at the histogram tool, we can see that in this case, Image Pro has automatically set a threshold of 841, which means that pixels with a grey level greater than or equal to 841 are selected as objects. Anything darker than that are considered to be background. This incidentally is 12-bit monochrome data, so it has an intensity range of 0 to 4095. Now you might want to edit the actual threshold that's been set, so you can just select the threshold in the histogram and move it from left to right to manually adjust the threshold, or alternatively, if you prefer, you can just edit the text field. So what we see here is a threshold, everything between 410 and 4095, the maximum grey level, are currently selected as objects. So you'll notice when you manually set the threshold that the thresholding method changes to manual to reflect the fact that you're actually making manual changes. You can then click on Count, and your objects are segmented. You then count and measure all of the segmented objects, and if you click on the data table option, you'll see a data table that shows measurements for each of your objects. If you click on the statistical data button, you get a statistical summary of your table. So here I can see the mean, standard deviation, minimum and maximum for each of my measurement types. Now you're probably going to want to refine your data. You may want to adjust the appearance of your objects. You may wish to resolve objects which are joined together. And you may wish to remove debris or noise from the analysis. So here we can see some fine bits of debris which are currently being counted as objects. So we can do this by selecting measurement options, which open on the right. Now in this case, I'm selecting an option called Clean Borders, and I'm setting it to all. What this means is that anything that touches the edge of the image will be ignored. So if I set Clean Borders to all and recount, I invalidate any objects that touch the edge and are therefore incomplete. So here you can see some examples arrowed, objects that touch the edge and that we're not going to analyze. And it's sensible to do that, because if they're not whole, we'll never know what their true area is, and we can never calculate their true mean intensity. So rather than have them skew our data, we exclude them. You can also change what text is displayed on your objects in the image. There's an option to display the object name or measurements, but in this case I've selected the option to show none. So I just see the outline of my objects on the image. You can also change the color and style of the objects. So here I've made the objects a little bit thicker by increasing the width. And from the histogram, I can select different colors. In this case, I've selected yellow. Now, if you want to split joined objects, here I can see several objects which are currently being counted as single objects, even though they're actually closely opposed pairs. So I can go to the Split tools and choose the option to split objects with count. And I can choose either a water-shedding method or a boundary shape method. So if I choose that option and then recount, most of my pairs are successfully resolved into individual objects. Here we can see one unsplit pair. And if I really want to make sure everything is fully split, I can manually split them. So there we see it's currently considered to be a single object. And I'm going to select now the manual split tool. This is going to allow me to draw a line between those objects where I want them to be split. And I finish that line with a right click, and when I click on the checkbox, the objects get resolved into two individual objects, which we can just show you now. So now everything's correctly split. Here you can see the small non-cellular objects that have been counted. I want to exclude these from my analysis. So I select the Edit Range option. And when you select Edit Range, you can choose any of your measurement types. In this case, I'm using area. I'm going to set a valid size range. So here I've set a size range, a minimum size of 37.5 square micrometers. Anything smaller than this is now ignored, and my small objects are no longer counted. So it's always useful to look at the count results. Here I see that of 100 objects that were initially found, only 75 remain valid. And that's because they don't touch the edge of the image, and they're within the valid size range. So let's take a look in Image Pro at going through that workflow again. So here again we see an image in which I have bright objects against a dark background. I'm going to select the Count Size tab. As I mentioned, it's always a good idea to hit the reset buttons. And I like to start by selecting my measurement types. So as I mentioned earlier, on the left-hand side we see all the possible measurements we can make, and on the right-hand side we have the selected measurements. I'm going to clear all these, and all I want to measure right now for area, let's go for mean intensity, and perhaps let's go for circularity. I'm now going to select the Auto Bright option, and as you can see, Image Pro has automatically chosen a threshold that separates my objects from the background. I'm just going to adjust the color that's been chosen here to make it a little clearer. And I'm going to make an adjustment. Although Image Pro's done a great job of finding the threshold to separate my objects from the background, I see an object down here that's not being included at the moment, so I'm just going to reduce the threshold a touch. And now this object is included. So let's hit Count. And there we can see all of my objects, my segmented objects, have been measured. If I show the measurements table, we can see the objects. I get bidirectional feedback. So if I select an object in the table, it gets highlighted in the image, and conversely, if I select an object in the image, I can see its row in the table. Now I want to refine the objects, as I mentioned. So let's first of all select the measurement options, which you find here with this cog. And as I said, I don't want to include any objects that touch the edge of the image. I never know their real area or their real mean intensity. So the option I need is called Clean Borders, and I'm going to set that to all, which means any object that touches any border of the image will be ignored. I'm also going to set the text option right now to none for clarity. And let's recount. And now you can see that I have 75 objects, only 70 remain in range because all the objects at the edge are currently being ignored. Okay, I have some objects in here which are joined, so I'd like to resolve those joins. So I'm going to use the Split tool, and I'm going to choose the Watershed option, and if I choose Split Object with Count, clear my objects and recount, those objects now get separated into individual objects. If I look closely, I can see some debris here which is being counted as an object. I want to exclude that from my count. So let's hit Edit Range, and I can choose to set a range on any of these measurements. I'm going to make the range on area, and I'm going to set the minimum area 40 square micrometers. And if I click OK, we find that that small object is no longer being analyzed. Let's repeat the count, and now we have a good measurement of all the objects in my image. Similarly, if we want to look at dark objects against a bright background, I'd start with Auto Dark. But I'm going to follow my own rules here and hit Reset for all of the count size options and reset my types. So again, we can clear. I think again I'm going to go for area, intensity mean. Let's go for perimeter this time. And now if I hit Auto Dark, Image Pro has set a threshold that separates my dark objects from my bright background. So you can see in this case, my minimum threshold is set to 0 and my maximum threshold is set to 150. This is just 8-bit grayscale data, so there's only 255 gray levels. So again, I can choose to edit my threshold if I wish to. and click Count. And let's again click Clean Borders to All and choose to not show text on the image. And again, I want to set a range. So I'm going to set a minimum range in this case of 20 square micrometers. And if we recount, I think I see some objects which are joined here. So again, I'm going to use the split option. So split with count and recount. And I think I need to use watershed instead of boundary shape. So let's do that again. Clear and count. And we can see that my object is split. Okay, so after you've completed your protocol, it's always a good idea to save your hard work. There's a little option in the Count Size tab here to save your measurement options. And this includes your measurement types, your range, your thresholds, and your measurement options. These are all saved as a single file. So you don't want to keep repeating your hard work and reinventing the wheel. You're going to analyze several images, save your options, and reuse them later. Now I'd like to go over smart segmentation. So what is smart segmentation? So often when you have a challenging segmentation problem, you might need to extract channels, maybe monochrome channels from a color image, or do image processing to try and find some images on which you can successfully segment your objects. Now this requires experimentation by the user, and that of course takes time. And we don't want to spend a lot of time working if we can avoid it. So the smart segmentation can do all this work for you silently in the background. And if you look at the panel on the right, you can see a number of channels that gets extracted by Image Pro automatically and analyzed as it tries to build a recipe to successfully identify your objects. Here you can see some background channels that get used, and here you can see some processed images that get used. All you need to do is select examples of what you're looking for. So again, we're going to start by resetting our options and select Smart Segmentation. And from the Smart Segmentation panel, I'm also going to choose to reset all of the options there, so I'm not working with any previous settings. I then choose the option to add all channels to the recipe so that Image Pro gets a chance to work with all of those background channels. Now I'm going to name the class, and in this case I've named my first class Brown, and I selected some areas that are representative of my brown objects. I can now add another class, so I have a little addition button here. I've added a new class which I've called Purple, and I've selected a region that represents the purple objects in my image. All that's left for me to do now is select the background. So I select the background tool, select the region of background, and Image Pro will at this point automatically classify all the pixels in my image as either one of my classes or as background. If you're interested in what the recipe looks like, if you just scroll over the little floppy disk icon here, you can actually see how Image Pro has built a recipe, and you can also save this recipe to use again on another day. So when I click the Count button, I go through the process I showed you with Auto Bright and Auto Dark. I can then refine, I can change the way my measurements are appearing, perhaps hide the text. And if I use the button Set Global, the recipe becomes applicable to other images. So I can select a second image. All I have to do now is click on Apply Global, and the same Smart Segmentation protocol will be applied. And again, on a third image here, I've done the same thing. I've hit Apply Global, and Image Pro has been able to successfully categorize my pixels into my classes. So let's just run through that live in Image Pro. I'm just going to open some appropriate images. And before I start, I'm going to hit my reset buttons. And let's take a look at image 1. So my problem here is that I want to classify my tissue here as either red or cyan. So let's start by selecting Smart Segmentation. And I'm going to reset my Smart Segmentation options and click the Add All Channels button. So firstly, let's name my first class. I'm going to call the first class Purple Tissue. And let's select or in fact, it should be red tissue in this case, red tissue. So let's select an area that represents the red tissue. So I'm just going to select one of these region of interest tools and select an area of red. Let's choose another one here. Now I can add a new class, which I'm going to call cyan tissue. And select an area that represents the cyan. And the final thing I need to do is select my background. And as you can see, Image Pro instantly is able to categorize everything in my image as either the red tissue, the cyan tissue, or background. I'm just going to check my measurement types, and let's reset those. So in this case, I'm going to work with just area, and let's go with percentage area. I'm also going to edit a range here, so I don't want to count a lot of really tiny objects. So I'm going to set a minimum area of 50 square pixels and select count. And here you can see that Image Pro has measured all of my tissue, and I'm just going to change the way it appears. So if I deselect the option to display text on the image, let's set that to none. And I'm also going to choose the filled option so we can see really clearly how all of my tissue is being categorized. And to my types, I'm just going to add, so I can see clearly which class each object belongs to, I'm going to add class name. And now if I look in my table, you can see that all of my objects that have been found have been assigned to either red tissue or cyan tissue. If I click on the option to group, I'm going to choose the option to group and summarize by sum. I can now see that in this image, the cyan tissue occupies 45% of the image area, whereas the red tissue occupies only 30% of the tissue area. So let's return to Smart Segmentation, and I'm going to set this as a global recipe, which means that if I go to my second image, all I have to do is apply global and click count, and all of the pixels within this image are instantly assigned to one of my two classes. So I can see in this case, the cyan tissue takes up 63% of the image area, whereas the red tissue is only 28%. And we can do the same thing for the third image. So if we select Smart Segmentation, so I can reset everything if I wish. And as soon as I hit Apply Global, we restore the recipe and we categorize all the pixels as either red or cyan. If we click Count, our measurement table will be populated. And here we can see that in this case, I have 41% of my image area as cyan and 40% as red tissue. Okay, so now let's discuss the next skill, which is using the data collector. So the data collector allows you to collect data from multiple images into a single table. It's found on the Review tab, where you find this data collector group of tools. And the data collector is just a table. It's a table that can collect data from many sources and from many different images. And if you look at the types, you'll see many different categories of data types. So I'm going to start in the Count Size tab, and here I've configured my measurement types. And I've executed a count so that my measurements table is now populated. It's a good idea always to save your measurements options, so I've done it in this case. And then when I go over to the Review tab, if I click on the Reset button, I now synchronize my data collector table with my count size table. So if I take a look at the table, here I can see I've got the same measurement type selected. And I can add other measurements if I wish to. So in this case, I've added from the image set data, the name of the image set. So now back to count size. I can check the configuration of the data collector button. We have various options to choose from, including all frames, clear collector, and clear measurements, but I only want to show the data collector table. That's the only option I'm going to leave selected. And the collector is now ready to use. So on image 1, if I execute my count and collect, the data collector becomes populated with measurements from the first image. If I look at my second image here, all I have to do is restore my measurements options, execute my count, and collect. And the measurements from the second image are added to the table. Now I open a third image, go through the same routine, I restore my measurement options, execute a count, and collect. And if I look at the table, it's got the measurements from all three images. So from this line upwards here, we're seeing measurements that were made on the second image. And from this line down, we can see measurements made on the third image. And if I choose the option to enable grouping and select the group by average option, I can see the averages from each of my images. So for example, here I can see the mean area from all three of my images. Now, it may be that you don't want to collect raw data, and the data collector can help you in this circumstance. So if I look at the measurements types, I see three different measurement types. I can look at measurements, which would allow me to collect all the raw measurements from my images. I can see measurement stats, which allow me just to make statistical measurements on each image. And I can see measurements class stats. In this case, I don't have any classes on my image. So I'm going to look at measurement stats, and I'm going to expand this option. And I'm going to select mean intensity, and I'm going to summarize it by mean and add that to my table. So I'm going to get the mean of the mean intensity. Just to be clear, what it means is we're measuring the mean intensity of each nucleus, and I'm now going to measure the mean from each image of all nuclei. So if we go through that process again of, for each of those three images, restoring my measurement options, counting, and then collecting, we do it all three times. We look at the data collector table. Under measurement stats, we see columns where we've just collected the statistics and ignored the raw data. So it's going to be very useful if you want to avoid having huge tables full of raw measurements. So let's take a quick look at the data collector directly in Image Pro. So let's close these images. Okay, so what I have here are three different fields of view, and these are actually composite images. Let's just improve the contrast here. So what this means is this is a multi-channel data set. If you look at the status bar at the bottom here, you can see the word multi-band and three different gray levels. So I've got three monochrome channels which are currently being superimposed on each other, so we can see them all in the same image. You can also notice that none of the segmentation options are currently enabled in the count size tab, and that's because Image Pro doesn't know which of these three channels I currently want to analyze. So I'm going to deselect the composite view. So there's a little button down here on the right of the image, color composite, which will allow me to deselect the color composite view, and I can then use the navigation tool to scroll between my three images. Now I'm going to restore my measurement options for analyzing nuclei. And this includes my measurement types of area and intensity. And I'm going to click the option to count. So now let's configure the data collector. So from the Review tab, as I mentioned earlier, if I just hit this Synchronize button, the types in the data collector will now reflect the types in my active table in the Count Size tab. And I also mentioned that we might want to use measurement statistics. So let's look under the measurements categories. Here we see that we have the option to add raw measurements, measurement statistics, and measurement class statistics. So let's add region area. And here you can see I can summarize it by various different statistical methods. I want the mean, and I'm going to add that to my table. That's my data collector successfully configured. So I go back to count size. Let's just check the data collector. So all I want is the option to show the data collector table. I already have my measurements on this image, so all I have to do now is click collect, and we can see measurements added from my first image. I go to my second field, and again, I deselect the composite view, restore my measurements options, and count and collect. And for field 3, deselect the composite view, restore my measurements options, and count and collect. So if we take a look at the data collected table, we do indeed have measurements from all 3 images, and if I group as before, showing average, I can see my average measurements from each image. If I look at the measurement stats, I just have the average without all the raw data. So that's the data collector. The final skill I'd like to go through with you is using learning classifiers. So here we see a field of view with nuclei that are either positive or negative for DAB. So they're either expressing whatever's being stained by DAB or not. And what I want to do is to be able to count all the objects in my image and divide them into 2 classes, either positive or negative. And this can be done using a learning classifier. So we start up by setting up measurement types that can be used to separate the classes. So in this case, a number of different color measurements have been made. And then we click on the Learning Classifier button and the Learning Classifier dialog opens. I then use this Add Class button to add 2 classes, one positive, one negative. And then I can select this little arrow for the positive class, and by holding down the Control key, I can select a number of objects that represent positively stained nuclei. I can then do the same for the negative class, select the little arrow, and select a number of objects that represent negatively stained nuclei or unstained nuclei. The next step is to click the Add All button, and that means that ImagePro has access to all of these different measurement types to try and build a recipe. And when we click Calculate Classifiers, you'll see that all of these different measurements get weighted in their usefulness for separating the objects into 2 classes. All I have to do now is click OK, and all of my objects are assigned to classes. If I look at the table, you can see that they're all the members of either the negative or the positive class. Again, we can choose the option to group measurements and summarize by average, and then I can see the average area here for both my negative and my positive class. So let's take a quick look at that in ImagePro. So here are my 3 images. So just to repeat the problem, I have nuclei and I want to assign them either to a positive or a negative class. I've already made measurements options so I can actually find the nuclei themselves. Let's restore those to Smart Segmentation Protocol. And if I hit count, you can see that all of my objects are found. I then want to assign them to classes. So I click on Learning Classifier. I'm going to click on the Add Class button twice. My first class I'm going to call positive, and the second class negative. We select the little arrow and we select some objects that represent the positive class. So I hold down the Control key and I can select my objects, and we don't need many, never more than 7 I would say, and we can click OK. And then we can do the same for the negative class. And again, we click OK. We click Add All. All of the measurements become accessible to ImagePro to build a recipe. We click Calculate Classifiers. All of our measurements get weighted. And if we click OK, everything will be assigned to either the positive or the negative class. Let's take a look at our data table and deselect the grouping. And let me just run through that again. I'm going to set the option to set global. So this recipe will then become accessible to other images. And if we look in the table, as you can see, everything is assigned to either negative or positive. So let's group those. So I'm grouping, and my total is going to be by average. So here I can see the average area for negative and average area for positive, and it looks like the positive are quite a lot larger. I can also use the data collector here, so let's do that. Let's go over to the Review tab. Let's reset, remove any objects from the data collector, reset the measurements, and look at the type. Now in this case, I am working with classes. So I'm not going to use measurement statistics, I'm going to use measurement class statistics. So I want to know for each class the area by me, and I also want to know the class name, so I'm going to add class name to my data collector types. And now if I go back to count size, for this image I can collect, and my data collector table becomes populated. Let's move to the second image and restore my measurements options and count. I can now open my learning classifier, and I'm going to choose the option to load global, and if I hit OK, my objects get assigned to the two classes. Let's just check my measurements table. So if I hit data collect, we add that to the data collector table. And we do the same thing for the third image. We restore the measurement options, and we'll count. Open the learning classifier. We're going to load global, click OK, and collect. So now if we check the data collector table and look at measurements class stats, we can see that we have measurements for positive and negative for each of our three images. And that brings me to the end of everything that I was hoping to go through. So I'm just going to hand over to Nick to close out the WebEx.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Definitely a lot of good information here today. So hopefully this was helpful for everyone who was on today's webinar. As a reminder for everyone, just if you do have any questions, today's webinar was recorded and we'll be sending this around by email to everyone. In addition to that, you'll be able to go to our homepage, mediacy.com/remote access, and once the webinar is available, it will be posted for you to view again on that website. Additionally, as a reminder, we are going to be having the third in our series next week on Tuesday, April 28th. If you'd like to sign up for that right now, feel free to go to the mediacy.com/remote access page, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you'll see you're able to register for next week's webinar right now. So I recommend you do that. It'll be on advanced analysis, and you're going to be able to learn a lot more about some of the extended details of smart segmentation, macro writing, and really how to get the most out of Image Pro. Now this isn't it. We're really excited to be continuing on, and we're thinking of lots more material, and we're looking forward to helping everyone who is in a remote access situation, needing to use Image Pro, not in their normal situation. So if you have any questions about today's webinar, any information regarding how to use the software, feel free to reach out to us. Just go to mediacy.com/support, click on that Image Pro button there, and then you can click the contact. You will be able to ask the community questions, submit a support ticket, or even reach us live by phone, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Now, in addition to this, if you do have any suggestions or things you'd like to go over in person, we have an entire partnership network that does have coverage of the world, and depending upon where you're located, we might be able to put you in touch with that partner, either have somebody touch base with you remotely who is a little bit closer to your time zone, maybe it'll help out in the morning or late evening compared to our East Coast time here, and might be of use as well. So definitely feel free to reach out, and we'll get you in touch with one of those partners if that's more useful to you as well. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you being on today's call. We're looking forward to talking to you on the next webinar. And in the meantime, stay safe, and thank you so much. Goodbye.